Okay, so yesterday we worked with decimal divisors, and today we're going to be looking at a dividend that does not have a decimal and what happens when we get a remainder if we want to actually turn that into a decimal number. So as of right now, it looks like a normal division problem, and we're just going to start dividing normally. So 2 would go into 2 one time. We subtract the 2. We drop the 5. 2 will go into 5 2 times. So 2 times 2 is 4. So we're going to take away a 4. We get a 1, drop the 7. And 2 will go into 7 8 times. I need a little more space here. I'm going to take away a 16. And we get 1. So at this point, I've got 128 remainder 1. So let's say, for example, this was money. And I had $1 left over, and I wanted to split that dollar with 2 people. Each person would get a half of the dollar, or 50 cents. So how am I going to do that with this number to actually make it a decimal? Well, right now my answer is 128, and I could put a decimal at the end of that 128 without changing the place value of the number. So I'm going to go ahead and put a decimal at the end. So I could put it there in my answer, or I could go ahead and put it down below in my dividend. Either way, it needs a decimal. Now I've run out of numbers, so I'm going to put a 0 and drop that 0 in order to continue. So now I've made 10. So 2 will go into 10 5 times, and 5 times 2 is 10. I'm running into my other problem. I have to space these out a little bit better. And now it went in evenly, so my answer is 128 5/10. Okay, so moving on to our next problem here. 4 will go into 5 one time. 1 times 4 is 4. Leaving me with 1. Drop the 7. 4 will go into 17 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. Subtract, leaving me with 1. Drop the 3. 4 will go into 13 3 times, and 3 times 4 is 12. Trying to write smaller this time, and I get 1. So at this point, I've got a remainder of 1, and I am splitting it 4 ways. So you'd go, okay, 1/4, that's going to be 25 cents, but let's go ahead and divide into it to prove it. So we're going to go ahead, when we get to the end, we have to put a decimal, because the remaining answer will not be a whole number. It's going to be a fractional part, or a decimal. So I add the 0 to the dividend. Don't put the 0 in the quotient. That spot right there is for your answer. So you don't want to put the 0 there. So I drop that 0. 4 will go into 10 2 times, and I take away 8, and I'm left with 2. Now it didn't go into evenly, so I can keep adding zeros. I can keep dropping those zeros as long as I want to get as many decimal places as I want. So we're going to go ahead and go to 2 decimal places, because that's normally what we do as 5th graders. So 2 or 4 will go into the 20 5 times, and 5 times 4 is 20. Man, I've got to find a way to fit these in here better. I guess this is why they call it long division, because it's so incredibly long sometimes. Okay, so now it went in evenly. It did terminate with a 0. So our answer is 143 25/100. Okay, so I'm going to pause it and set up the next one. And I encourage you to write them down, solve them on your own, and then unpause the video to see how you. Okay, so I shrunk it down a little bit this time. We'll see if it fits any better. So feel free to work it out on your own and then unpause it and see how you did. So 5 will go into 7 one time. 1 times 5 gives me 5. Subtract and I get 2. Drop the 8. 5 will go into 28. 5 times 5 is 25. Subtract and I get 3. Wish that would stop popping up there. So drop my 2, I get 32. Get that to pop off there. It doesn't want to. Okay, and then 5 will go into 32 6 times. Take away 30. I'm left with 2. So I get to this point, I've run out of numbers. That normally would be my remainder, but I want to keep going. So let's say I've got $156 and I want to know how many cents I have. So I put the decimal at the end. I'm going to put a 0 in the dividend, not in the answer, not in the quotient, and drop that 0. So 5 will go into 20 4 times. Take away the 20. There I go. Okay, so pause it and set up your next one. So on the next one, dividing by a 2-digit divisor this time. So 12 will not go into 3. So I need to put a placeholder 0. That's going to be important to line up the decimal later. But 12 will go into 37 3 times, because 3 times 12 is 36. Oh, and it's hard to write on the screen sometimes. Okay, get my 1, drop my 8. And so 12 will go into 18 1 time. Take away the 12. And I get 6. So when I've run out of numbers, I need to remember to add my decimal and drop my 0. So 12 will go into 60 5 times. 5 times 12 is 60. And it terminated. So here's our answer here. 31 5/10. So we've got just 2 more problems to do down here. If it'll let me move my screen to where I can get to them. Oh, it's not scrolling. Okay, so we're on our last 2 practice problems here. So 3 will go into 9 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, I get 0, drop the 1. So 3 will not go into 1, but it's very important that you do put a placeholder 0. Don't just move on over to the 16 and go ahead and put your answer. You have to block that spot off with a 0. So now I'm going to drop my 6 and I get 16. 3 will go into 16 5 times. And I'm going to take away 15 and I get 1. So this is the point we reach where we make it into a decimal problem because we've got a remainder. So I've got 305. I'm going to put the decimal before I keep going to make it a decimal problem. So I put a 0 in my dividend. You always need a number in the dividend in order to put a number up above in the quotient. And I'm going to drop that 0. So 3 will go into 10 3 times. I take away 9. I get 1. So I didn't get 0, so I can keep going. And I drop a 0. And it's 10 again, and 3 will go into 10 3 times again. And you're seeing a pattern here. This is what is called a repeating decimal, and I could keep doing this indefinitely for the rest of my life, and I would keep getting 0.33333. So you could either go to the number of decimal places that your teacher wants, whether they say 2 or 3 places, or that first 3, we could put a solid line over it, and we wouldn't even need this one because it's 3 repeating decimal. So that line on top lets me know that it is a repeating decimal. So we're going to do our last practice problem here. So we're dividing by 7 now. So 7 will not go into 5, so placeholder 0. So let's see, 7 is going to go into 54. What would that be? 7 times? Because 7 times 7 is 49. Okay, and subtract if you need to. If you can't figure that out in your head, you can go ahead and borrow here. So that becomes 14. 14 minus 9 is 5. Drop the 7. Okay, so 7 will go into 57, I guess 8 times, right? Because 8 times 7 is 56. So when I run out of numbers, that's when it becomes a decimal problem, because that remainder 1, we're going to turn into a decimal. So we put our decimal, drop our 0, and you'll see it's always put a decimal, drop a 0. So 7 will go into 10 1 time. Take away the 7. I get 3. So it didn't terminate, so I can put a 0 and go again. And 7 will go into 30 4 times, take away 28, and then I get a 2. And you'll see I could keep going. I don't know how long I could keep going, but we're just going to stop at 2 decimal places. Once it looks like money, we're done. Okay, so that's it for today. We're going to get into some practice activities next.